Good evening, and welcome. Wherever you are right now, whatever the day asked of you, you can let it go. There is nothing left to carry into these next quiet hours. Nothing to fix, nothing to answer, nothing to hold on to. You can let your eyes close whenever they wish. I will still be here, telling the story softly in the dark. And it will go on the way a river goes on through the night, patient and unhurried, whether or not anyone is awake to follow it. Tonight we are going to travel a very long way, not only across the world, but far, far back through time, further even than we traveled together before. We are going to a wide, hot land of great rivers, to the plains of what is now Pakistan and northwest India, to a place where 5,000 years ago, something extraordinary rose up out of the mud and the floodwater, flourished for many centuries, and then quietly, gently, faded away, almost without trace, leaving behind cities so perfect and so silent that when they were found again, no one could quite believe they were real. This is the story of a civilization that had no name, or rather, whose name we have lost so completely that we have had to borrow one from the river that ran through its heart. We call them the people of the Indus, the Harappans, after the first of their cities to be uncovered, and they are, in many ways, the most mysterious great people who ever lived. Imagine for a moment that you are standing on that plain, not in the age of its glory, but long, long after. It is a little more than 100 years ago, and you are in the dry season, and the land stretches away flat and pale to a shimmering horizon. There are low mounds here and there, gentle rises in the earth, the kind you might walk over without a second thought, thinking them only the natural swell of the ground. Villagers have lived among these mounds for as long as anyone remembers. Sometimes, digging, they turn up strange small bricks, beautifully made, all exactly the same size, harder and finer than any brick they know how to make themselves. And no one knows where they come from. The bricks are simply there, in the earth, endless, as though the ground itself had once been a city. And that is the truth of it. Because beneath those quiet mounds, under the dust and the grazing cattle and the centuries of forgetting, lie whole cities. Streets laid out in perfect grids, houses of fired brick, wells and bathing floors and drains, great platforms and granaries and walls. A world of hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps more than 1 million across the whole of it, that rose here on the plains when the pyramids of Egypt were still new, and then slipped away so completely that its own descendants walked over its rooftops for 3,000 years, without ever guessing what lay beneath their feet. That is the story we will follow tonight, not as a riddle to be chased down in a hurry, but as a slow turning of the earth, the way a season turns, the way a long day settles at last into evening. There is nothing frightening waiting for us in this story. You already know how it ends. The cities are quiet now. The plain has kept them. And theirs is one of the softest endings in all of history. A fading rather than a fall. A people who seem simply to have set down their great cities the way you are setting down this day, and walked on into the dark and slept. So make yourself comfortable. Let the day dissolve, and let us begin where everything here began. Not with a king, not with a war, but with a river. Long before there were any cities, there were the rivers. The land these people would come to fill is a land written entirely by water. Down out of the high mountains in the north, out of the snow and the ice of the Himalaya, came the rivers. And chief among them the great Indus, gathering the meltwater of 1,000 peaks and carrying it down across the plains toward the distant sea. Each year, As the snows melted and the monsoon gathered, the rivers would rise and spill over their banks and lay down across the flat land a fresh skin of silt, soft and dark and fertile. The finest soil in the world for the growing of grain. And each year, the waters would draw back again and leave the fields ready. This was the gift and the foundation of everything that followed. A land renewed every single year by the patient work of the rivers. A land that could feed a great many people, if only those people could learn to live alongside the flood, to plant in its wake, and build above its reach, and share out its bounty among themselves. And slowly, over many generations, along the banks of the Indus and its sister rivers, small farming villages began to appear. People learned to grow wheat and barley. They kept cattle and sheep and goats. They made pottery, and then they made better pottery, and they began to trade it up and down the river, from village to village, until the whole long valley was threaded together by the quiet movement of goods and grain and people. There was no sudden moment of beginning, no single founder we can name, no first king rising on a mountain. Instead, there was simply this: hundreds of years of ordinary lives, farming and building and trading along the great rivers, each generation a little more settled, a little more skilled, a little more connected to its neighbors. Until one day, without anyone deciding it, the villages had become towns, and the towns had begun to become something the world had never seen before. Cities. Real cities, planned and built with astonishing care, rising out of the floodplain like a thought becoming solid. Let us walk into one of them now, in the age of its glory, and see what these people made. The sun is high over the plain, and ahead of you, the city rises on its great platform of brick, lifted deliberately above the reach of the yearly flood. This is no jumble of huts thrown up wherever there was room. As you come closer, you see that the city has been thought about, planned, laid out whole in someone's mind before a single brick was set. The main streets run straight and wide, oriented to the points of the compass, crossing one another at neat right angles, dividing the city into great blocks the way a modern city is divided. Down the smaller lanes between the houses, everything is ordered, deliberate, clean. And the bricks, everywhere the same bricks, fired hard in kilns and made, every one of them, to the same careful proportions, so that a brick from this city would fit perfectly into a wall in another city 100 miles away. Think for a moment about what that means. Somewhere in this world there was an agreement, held across hundreds of miles and countless workshops, about exactly how large a brick should be. No one wrote it down in any language we can read, and yet it held everywhere for centuries. A quiet, invisible order, running underneath everything, the way the current runs underneath the calm surface of a river. You walk in through the streets and you begin to notice the water. Not the river, but the water of the city itself, moving everywhere around you, carried and controlled with a genius that will not be matched again for thousands of years. Nearly every house, even quite modest ones, has its own well, or shares one close by, sunk deep and lined with those same perfect bricks curved to fit the circle. And nearly every house has a bathing place, a small room with a carefully made floor of tightly laid brick, sloped so that the water runs off it toward the edge and out through a channel in the wall and into a drain that runs beneath the street. And those drains. Down the side of every street runs a covered channel of brick, and into it flow the smaller channels from each house, and the whole system carries the used water away, out of the city in a network so complete and so carefully built that engineers who study it today speak of it with something close to disbelief. There are settling basins to catch the solid waste. There are inspection holes so the drains could be cleared. There is, in short, a working system of sanitation serving an entire city of tens of thousands of people, built 5,000 years ago, and it is better than what most of the world would have for the next 4,000 years. Remember this. We will return to it, gently. It tells us something about who these people were. Let us slow down here and simply be in the city for a while, on an ordinary evening, when the great heat of the day is beginning at last to loosen its hold. The sun is going down over the plain, enormous and orange through the dust, and the fired brick of the walls has soaked up the warmth of the long day and gives it back now slowly into the cooling air. Along the wide main street, the traders are packing away their goods. The smell of wood smoke drifts from 100 small hearths as the evening meal is prepared. Flat bread on hot stones, lentils softening in clay pots. The same simple good food that people would eat in that land for thousands of years to come. Somewhere, a potter's wheel is still turning. Somewhere, a child is being called in from the lanes. Cattle are led back through the gates, their hooves soft in the dust. And above it all, the first stars begin to show over the flat horizon. The same stars these people watched, and perhaps read, and certainly wondered at, 5,000 years ago. There is a house here, like many others, and let us step inside it, for the houses tell us much about the gentleness of this world. It is built around a small central courtyard, open to the sky, so that light and air come down into the heart of the home, while the thick brick walls keep the fierce sun out. The rooms open onto this courtyard, cool and shadowed. There are stairs, which means there was an upper floor, or at least a flat roof, where the family might sleep on the hottest nights, up in whatever breeze the darkness brought. There is the bathing room with its beautifully laid floor, and its drain running out to the street. There is a hearth. There are storage jars. There are the small, precious things of daily life. A few beads, a copper mirror, a toy. For they made toys, these people. Little clay carts with wheels that turned, and small animals, and whistles shaped like birds, and dice for games whose rules we will never know. A whole warm domestic world, ordinary and comfortable and deeply human, held inside walls that have waited empty for 4,000 years. The greatest of these cities we now call Mohenjo-daro, which is not its true name, for its true name is lost with all the rest. The name we use means, in the local tongue, the Mound of the Dead, a name the later people gave the silent hill before anyone knew what slept inside it. And when it was finally opened, it proved to be one of the largest and most magnificent cities of the entire ancient world, laid out on its great platforms above the flooding of the Indus, its citadel and its lower town, its main streets broad enough for carts to pass, its thousands of houses, its wells beyond counting, its miles of covered drains. Tens of thousands of people lived here, in this one city, in an order and a cleanliness that would not be seen again for age upon age. And it was only one of many. Far to the north stood Harappa, the first to be found. Away to the east and south stood others, dozens of towns and cities and villages scattered across a territory larger than any other civilization of its time, larger than ancient Egypt, larger than the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates, a single connected world stretching across the whole vast basin of the rivers and out along the shores of the sea. And they were not all alike, these cities, which is part of their wonder. In one place, out on a dry and salty plain, the people built their city not of brick alone, but of beautifully dressed stone. And because water was so precious there, they became the greatest water engineers of all, carving enormous reservoirs into the rock and channeling every drop of the scarce rain into great tanks, so that a city could live and even flourish in a place that should have been too dry to hold it. They built gateways and walls and a great open ground that may have been a place of gathering, and everywhere the careful catching and holding of water, the same genius for water that runs through this whole story, like the rivers themselves. To stand in that stone city now, on its dry plateau, and to see the vast, empty reservoirs cut so precisely into the living rock, is to understand how completely these people had mastered the one thing their world could not do without. For here is the strange and beautiful thing about the cities of the Indus. All that care, all that planning, all that quiet, collective genius was poured not into palaces, and not into tombs, and not into towering monuments to the glory of kings. It was poured into the ordinary business of living well. Clean water, good drains, solid, comfortable houses of a decent size, remarkably alike, without the enormous gulf you find in other ancient places between the palace of the ruler and the hovel of the poor. When we walk through the cities of Egypt or of Mesopotamia, we find ourselves standing beneath the shadow of god-kings, before great temples and greater tombs, reading everywhere the boast of power. But when we walk through the cities of the Indus, we find, instead, a bath, a well, a drain, a granary to store the grain of the whole community. The works, it seems, of a people who cared, above all, for the shared and quiet decencies of life. Let us climb now to the highest part of the city, the raised mound the archaeologists call the citadel, and see the strangest and most famous thing these people left behind. It is a great tank, a pool, sunk into the ground and made watertight with a skill that borders on the miraculous. The builders laid the bricks so tightly and sealed them with a lining of black waterproof pitch that the pool could hold water without losing it into the earth. Steps lead down into it at either end, broad, shallow steps, as though many people were meant to descend into the water together. Around it runs a courtyard, and small rooms, and a great well nearby to fill it. We do not know, and we will never know for certain, what it was for. But almost everyone who studies it feels the same thing standing before it, that this was a sacred place, a place of gathering, of cleansing, of ritual bathing, where the people of the city came down together into still water for reasons that mattered deeply to them, reasons that have now dissolved entirely into time, leaving only the beautiful empty pool, waiting in the silence of the mound. There is something very restful in that, I think, that the grandest structure these careful people built was not a monument to conquest or to death, but a great calm pool of clean water, open to the sky, for the washing away of whatever needed washing away. As if at the very center of their world, they placed the simple act of becoming clean again, of setting down for day, of stepping into stillness. Now, let us leave the citadel and go down into the lower town and walk among the people themselves and try to imagine the life that filled these silent streets. It is a life built on grain. Out in the fields beyond the walls, in the rich silt left by the flood, the farmers grow wheat and barley, and along with it, peas and lentils and sesame, and, in time, cotton, which these people were among the very first in all the world to grow and to spin and to weave into cloth. The harvest comes into the city and is stored in the great granaries, raised up on platforms with channels beneath them for the air to move and keep the grain dry. Guarded and shared out, the wealth of the whole community gathered in one careful place. And from that steady surplus of food, everything else becomes possible. The potters at their wheels, turning out vessels by the thousand, painted with black designs on a deep red slip, fish and leaves and interlocking circles, and the pipple tree with its heart-shaped leaves. The bead makers, drilling tiny holes through hard carnelian and agate with a patience that seems almost superhuman, making necklaces so fine they would be treasured 1,000 miles away. The metal workers, casting bronze, hammering copper. The masons, endlessly making and laying those perfect bricks. Let us sit for a while beside one of these craftspeople, a bead maker, and watch the patient work of her hands. For in that patience, there is something worth carrying with you down into sleep. Before her is a small piece of carnelian, a stone of deep, warm orange, hard as glass. She has already shaped it, roughly, by chipping and grinding, into a long, slender bead. Now comes the hardest part, the part that seems almost impossible. She must drill a hole straight down the length of it, a hole finer than a stalk of grass, through a stone so hard it would blunt an iron tool. And she has no iron. She has only a drill tipped with an even harder stone, and a bow to spin it, and sand and water to grind away, and time. Above all, time. It might take her many days, turning and turning the little drill, wetting it, grinding, checking, turning again, to pierce a single long bead. And she will make hundreds of them. Necklaces of these beads would travel across the sea to Mesopotamia and be treasured in the courts of kings. And all of it, every gleaming bead, was won by exactly this: the quiet, unhurried patience of a human being at her work, giving her hours and her days to a small, perfect thing. There is no shortcut in it. There is only the turning of the drill, and the sound of the water, and the slow deepening of the hole, hour after hour, in the warm shade of the workshop. And everywhere, underlying all this making and trading, there ran that same invisible thread of order we met in the bricks. For these people had weights, carefully cut little cubes of polished stone, made to a system so precise and so consistent that a weight from one city matches a weight from another, hundreds of miles away, almost exactly. They had settled, somehow, across their whole vast world, on exactly how much a thing should weigh, just as they had settled on how large a brick should be, and they held to it, in market after market, for centuries. When you bought grain or beads or copper in a city of the Indus, it was measured against these same true weights, whether you stood in the north or the south, by the mountains or the sea. Think of the trust that requires, the quiet agreement held across 1 million people and 700 years, that a measure would be honest, and the same for everyone. We have no idea who enforced it, or whether anyone needed to, but it held. And that holding, that deep shared fairness, running silently beneath the daily business of life, may be the truest monument these people ever built, though you cannot photograph it or dig it from the ground. and the traders. For these were great traders, and the reach of their trade is one of the ways we know how large and confident their world had become. Down the rivers and along the coast, and across the sea in wooden boats went the goods of the Indus, their beads and their cotton, and their fine, hard timber, all the way to the cities of Mesopotamia, to distant Ur and Sumer, where clay tablets in another language speak of ships coming from a far country the Sumerians called Meluha, bringing carnelian and copper and ivory and wood. That far country was almost certainly this one. So there were Indus merchants, or their goods at least, in the markets of the world's other great civilization, an ocean away, 5,000 years ago. Two of the earliest great human worlds reaching out across the water to touch one another, trading beads and timber under the same ancient sun. To seal their bargains and to mark their goods, these people made something small and lovely that has become, for us, the very face of their lost world. They made seals, little squares of soft stone, carved with exquisite care, each one bearing the image of an animal, and above it a short line of mysterious signs. The animals are rendered with real tenderness and skill. A humped bull, heavy and powerful. An elephant, a tiger, a rhinoceros, and again, a strange creature that never existed. A single-horned animal we call the unicorn, standing before what might be a manger or a ritual object, its meaning long since lost. These seals were pressed into soft clay to mark bundles of goods, to say, perhaps, this belongs to such a person or comes from such a place. Thousands of them have been found, and each one carries above its patient animal that short line of signs. Which brings us to the deepest mystery of all, the one that sits at the very heart of this sleeping civilization and has never, in all this time, been solved. These people could write. On their seals, on scraps of pottery, on small tablets they left behind their script. Hundreds of different signs, some like fish, some like plants, some like human figures, some pure abstract shapes, arranged in short sequences, written, it seems, from right to left. It is a real writing system. It carried real meaning. The people who made it could read it as easily as you are following these words. And we cannot read a single line of it. Not one. Despite a century of effort, despite the finest minds and now the most powerful machines bent to the task, the script of the Indus has never been deciphered, and it may never be. The inscriptions are so short, most of them only a handful of signs, that there is little for the codebreakers to work with. And we have no key, no second inscription in a language we know. Nothing like the great stone that once unlocked the writing of Egypt. So the words remain, thousands of them, perfectly preserved, utterly silent. We can see exactly what they wrote. We simply cannot hear what they said. Think about that for a moment, as you lie there in the dark. A whole people, 1 million strong, who lived and loved and worked and worshipped for 1,000 years, who built the cleanest cities in the ancient world, who wrote their thoughts down carefully in a script of their own devising, and every word of whom has fallen silent. We do not know what language they spoke. We do not know the names of their gods or their kings, if they had kings at all. We do not know what they called their cities, or their rivers, or themselves. Everything they said to one another, every name whispered, every bargain struck, every prayer, has passed beyond our reach into a silence as deep and as gentle as sleep. And yet the cities remain, the seals remain. The quiet order of it all remains. They left us everything but their voice. There is no need to find this sad. There is something almost peaceful in it. A people who kept their own counsel across 5,000 years, who let their works speak and kept their words to themselves. And their works speak so eloquently. They tell us of care and skill and patience, and a love of order, and a deep attention to the ordinary goodness of daily life. Perhaps that is voice enough. Let us stay a while longer in the living city before we come to the long, slow evening of its story. Let us think about how it was governed, this vast and orderly world. And here again we meet the mystery, and again it is a soft and curious one. For in all the digging, in all the cities uncovered, no one has ever found a palace. No one has found the tomb of a great king heaped with treasure. No one has found grand statues of rulers, no carved boasts of victories won, no scenes of one people crushing another. In every other ancient civilization we know, power announces itself loudly, in monuments and images and the piled-up wealth of the few. Here, that voice is simply absent. And so we are left to wonder how such a huge and coordinated world, with its shared bricks and its shared script and its shared standards, held together at all. Who decided how large a brick should be? Who planned the streets before the city rose? Who gathered the grain and shared it out? Someone, or some group, guided all this, across centuries and hundreds of miles. But they did not leave us their faces, or their names, or their thrones. They governed, it seems, quietly, and vanished quietly. And that quiet is itself a kind of monument, the most unusual monument in the ancient world. A great civilization that did not shout. There is one more small thing they left us, and I would like to place it gently in your mind as you drift, because it is perhaps the most alive of all their silent gifts. It is a tiny figure of bronze, no taller than your hand. A young woman, cast 5,000 years ago by the lost wax method, which these people knew. She stands with one hand resting on her hip, and her chin tilted slightly upward, her long legs a little relaxed, her arm ringed from wrist to shoulder with bangles. And there is, in her whole posture, an easy, confident, almost teasing grace. The unmistakable attitude of a real person caught in a real moment, thousands of years ago, by an artist who saw her and loved the look of her, and pressed that look forever into metal. We call her the dancing girl, though we do not truly know that she danced. We know almost nothing about her at all, but she stands there still, small and dark and perfect, with her hand on her hip and her head held high. And across 5,000 years of silence, she seems forever about to speak, or to laugh, or to turn away. Of all the things the Indus left us, she is the one who feels most like a person met, rather than a world observed. And even she says nothing. She only stands, gracefully, in the quiet, keeping her secret along with all the rest. We do find, here and there, small hints of what they held sacred. Little clay figures of a mother goddess, heavy with life. That recurring pipal tree, which would remain holy in that land for thousands of years to come, long after these people were forgotten. A famous seal showing a figure seated in what looks very like a posture of meditation, surrounded by animals, which some believe may be an early glimpse of ideas that would echo down the ages into the later religions of India. And that great bath on the citadel, that calm pool for ritual cleansing. From these small clues, we can dimly sense a spiritual world gentle and rooted in the land and the water and the living things around them. But we cannot read the prayers. We can only see the pipal leaves painted on the pottery and imagine the rest. And through all those centuries, the great steadying rhythm of their lives was the turning of the year, and the turning of the year was the coming and going of the water. Let us follow it once, slowly, the way they must have felt it in their bones. In the cool, dry months, the rivers run low and clear, and the fields lie golden with the ripening grain, and the harvest is gathered in and carried up to the granaries, and there is trade and building, and the long work of the crafts, all under a mild and gentle sun. Then, as the year turns, the heat begins to build, day by day, week by week, until the land is baked hard and pale, and the whole world seems to be holding its breath, waiting. The air thick and heavy, the people watching the sky. And then, at last, far off, the clouds gather over the mountains and the sea, and the monsoon breaks, and the rains come sweeping across the plain in great grey curtains, drumming on the flat roofs, filling the dry channels, and up in the high country the snows are melting too. And all that water gathers into the rivers, and the rivers rise and swell, and at the height of it spill their brown and fertile flood across the fields, right up to the raised brick platforms on which the wise builders had set their cities, safe above the waters. And the people would watch the flood come, every year, as their parents and their grandparents had watched it, and know that when it drew back again, it would leave behind that gift of dark, rich silt, and the whole slow cycle of the grain would begin once more. Their lives were set to that great tidal breath of the land, the rising and the falling of the waters, in and out, year upon year upon year, as regular and as reassuring as the breath moving through your own body in the quiet now. It is no wonder they became such masters of the holding and the guiding of water. Water was their calendar, their wealth, their whole world. Remember that as we come now to the ending. For when the story turns, it is the water, in the end, that turns it. And so the centuries passed, and the cities lived their long and settled lives. And generation followed generation along the great rivers, growing their grain and firing their bricks, and drilling their beads, and pressing their silent seals into the soft clay. For something like 700 years at their height, this world endured. Longer than most empires, longer by far than most of the loud and famous civilizations whose names we remember and whose words we can read. 7 quiet centuries of order and comfort on the floodplains of the Indus. But nothing that rises stays risen forever. And now we come, softly, to the ending. To the long, slow, mysterious fading of this great and gentle world. It did not fall. That is the first thing to understand, and it is a comfort. There was no single catastrophe, no burning of the cities, no invading army pouring over the walls to put an end to it all in a night. For a long time, people imagined there must have been some such disaster, some dramatic destruction, because that is how the mind expects a great thing to end. But the more carefully the cities were studied, the more clearly they told a different and quieter story. The story of a slow letting go. Around 4,000 years ago, the world these people had mastered began, gradually, to change beneath their feet. And at the heart of the change, as at the heart of everything in their story, were the rivers. The great river system that had fed them, that had laid down the rich silt year after year and made all of this possible, began to shift. The climate itself was changing, slowly, across the whole region. The monsoon that watered the plains grew weaker, less reliable, its rains thinner and harder to count on. And the rivers responded. Some began to dry. One mighty river that had once flowed alongside the Indus, that had nourished many of the eastern cities, slowly withered as the waters that fed it were captured elsewhere, or simply failed, until in time it dwindled away toward nothing, leaving its cities stranded beside a fading stream. Other rivers changed their courses, wandering across the flat land as great rivers do over the long ages, moving away from the towns that depended on them, so that a city that had stood for centuries on a living river might find, over generations, the water quietly leaving it behind. Imagine that, not as a disaster, but as a slow tide going out. The flood a little lower each year, a little less certain. The harvest a little thinner. The distant markets a little harder to reach as the trade routes shifted. Nothing sudden. Nothing you could point to and call the end. Only a long, gentle pressure, year upon year, generation upon generation, as the land that had been so generous, slowly, quietly, asked for more than it gave. And the people did what people have always done. They adapted. They moved. Not in a single desperate flight, but in the slow way that water finds its level. Families and communities began, gradually, to leave the great cities of the plain and drift eastward and away, toward regions where the rains were still kinder and the rivers still ran full, toward the lands watered by the Ganges and its tributaries. They took their skills with them, their farming, their crafts, their ways of living, and they carried on. The civilization did not so much die as disperse. It thinned out and spread thin and settled into smaller villages, and the vast coordinated world of the great cities, the shared bricks and the shared script and the far-reaching trade, gently came undone. And though the great cities faded, the people themselves did not vanish from the earth. And this, too, is a comfort. They flowed on into the countless villages of a new age, and they carried their long inheritance with them, quietly, without knowing they were carrying it. The farming of wheat and barley and cotton went on. The keeping of cattle went on. The making of beads and pots and bangles went on. That holy pipal tree, painted so often on their pottery, remains sacred in that land for thousands of years, and is sacred there still. The seated figure on the little seal, wrapped in its posture of calm, may whisper faintly forward across the centuries to ideas of meditation and stillness that would flower long after into the great religions of India. The bullock cart, with its wooden wheels, whose little clay model a child once played with in a Harappan courtyard, still creaks along village lanes in that same country today, almost unchanged. So it was not truly an ending, this fading, so much as a dissolving and a flowing onward. The great river of these people breaking at last into 1,000 quiet streams that sank into the wider land and watered everything that came after, unseen, unremembered, but never entirely gone. When a great civilization sets itself down, its people do not simply disappear. They become the ancestors. They become the soil of the world that follows. The cities themselves did not fall in fire. They simply grew quieter. Fewer people in the streets each year. The great drains, no longer tended, silting up. The fine planning of the streets gradually blurred as smaller, humbler dwellings were built without the old care. The writing, which seems to have been bound up with the trade and the administration of that great connected world, fell slowly out of use until no one wrote the little signs anymore. And then, in time, no one could read them, and the voice of the Indus fell silent for good. And the bricks of the empty houses, so perfectly made, began their long return to the earth. The wind brought dust. The floods, when they came, left silt. Slowly, over the centuries, the mounds rose over the sleeping cities, and grass grew on the mounds, and cattle grazed on the grass, and villages of a new age were built on top of the old. And the people of those villages turned up the strange, perfect bricks in their fields and wondered, mildly, where they came from, and used them to build their houses and to line their wells, never dreaming that they were handling the bones of the oldest cities in the land. And there the great civilization of the Indus lay, folded into the plain, forgotten so completely that even its memory was lost for 3,000 years and more. Its rediscovery, when it finally came, is a story with its own quiet strangeness. In the 19th century, as the railways were being pushed across that land, the engineers building the line needed hard, solid material to make a firm bed for the tracks. And there, near a village called Harappa, was a great mound full of exactly that. Endless supplies of beautiful ancient brick, hard and even and perfect. So they quarried the mound. They carried away cartload after cartload of those 5,000-year-old bricks, and crushed some, and laid others beneath the rails. And for many miles the trains of the modern age ran, all unknowing, upon the ballast of a forgotten civilization. A city that had lain patient in the earth for 3,000 years was carried off, brick by brick, to hold up a railway, before anyone understood what it was. It was only later, well into the 20th century, that scholars finally began to grasp the truth. That these mounds were not the ruins of some minor lost town, but the remains of an entire civilization, one of the very first and greatest in all the world, standing shoulder to shoulder in age with Egypt and with Sumer, and in many ways more advanced than either. The digging began in earnest. The cities rose again out of the dust into the light. The perfect streets, the wells and the drains, the great bath on the citadel, the granaries, the thousands of little seals with their patient animals and their silent script. A whole lost world, returning at last, after 5,000 years, to the memory of humankind. And yet, even now, even with all our digging and all our science, it keeps its deepest secrets. We still cannot read a word it wrote. We still do not know its name for itself, or the names of its gods, or whether it had kings. We still do not fully understand why it faded, only that the rivers changed and the rains failed, and the people, gently, moved on. It is the great civilization that speaks to us in everything except words, that shows us its cities and hides its heart, that left us its beautiful, silent, unreadable seals, and let the rest dissolve into time. And in a way, perhaps that is the truest thing about it, and the most peaceful. This was a people who did not shout across the ages. They built well and lived well, and cared for the clean and quiet decencies of daily life. And then, when the long, slow evening came, and the rivers turned away, they let go of their great cities without a struggle, and walked on into the dark, carrying what mattered, leaving the rest to the earth. There is a kind of wisdom in that, a kind of grace, the grace of knowing how to set a thing down. That is the thought I would like to leave you with, as you drift off now, wherever you are. whatever the hour has become. Everything that rises will one day come to rest. Every great work, every busy and ordered world, every clever and careful human striving, will in its time be quietly folded back into the larger silence, and the dust will settle over it, and the grass will grow, and the rivers will wander away, and it will sleep. There is no need to be sad about this. It is simply the shape of things, the long, slow breathing of the world, rising and resting, gathering and letting go, as steady and as gentle as the breath moving softly in and out of you now. The people of the Indus wanted, I think, only to live well, in clean and ordered cities, beside their generous rivers. And in the way that matters, they did. And something of them remains, still, after 5,000 years. Not their words, which are lost, not their names, which are gone, but the calm of that great bath open to the sky, and the tenderness of a little carved bull, no larger than your thumb, and the astonishing quiet order of a city built for the comfort of ordinary lives. All of it waiting patiently in the earth, having outlasted every loud and famous empire that ever mocked its silence. Rest now. The cities are sleeping beneath the plain, as they have for 4,000 years. Their perfect streets still laid out true beneath the dust, their wells still round, their great pool still open to the changing sky. There is nothing at all that you need to do but let go, and breathe, and drift, and follow that ancient sleeping world down into the quiet and the dark, where the rivers still murmur somewhere far off, and everything is finally, deeply at rest. Sleep well.